The thunderous sound of galloping hooves drowned out Beatrice Fairchild's desperate screams as the stagecoach lurched violently to one side, nearly toppling over on the dusty trail leading to Eureka, California. It was the summer of 1858, and what had begun as a journey of promise was about to become a nightmare that would forever alter the course of her life. Beatrice clutched her reticule to her chest, heart hammering against her ribs as the vehicle came to an abrupt halt. The elderly couple seated across from her exchanged terrified glances. Outside, gruff voices barked commands, followed by the unmistakable click of revolvers being cocked. "Everybody out, now." A raspy voice demanded, as the door was wrenched open by a bearded man whose face was half hidden beneath a filthy bandana. The driver's pleading voice drifted down from above. "We ain't carrying gold today, boys, just passengers." "Shut your mouth unless you want a bullet in it," another outlaw snapped. "Search 'em all." Beatrice felt rough hands grabbing her arms, dragging her from the relative safety of the coach into the blinding California sunlight. Her honey blonde hair tumbled from its pins as she struggled against her captor's iron grip. At 22, she had never known such terror. Well, what do we have here?" The leader of the gang circled her like a predator, his yellowed teeth visible beneath his mustache as he grinned. "Looks like we found something better than gold, boys." The elderly woman from the coach sobbed quietly as her husband was shoved to his knees. The driver and shotgun guard stood with their hands raised, faces pale with fear. "Please," Beatrice begged, her voice trembling, "I have money." "Take it, but oh, we'll take that too, darling," the outlaw leader said, reaching for her face. A gunshot cracked through the air, sharp and definitive. The outlaw's hand froze midway to Beatrice's cheek, his expression morphing from sadistic pleasure to stunned disbelief as a crimson stain blossomed across his chest. He crumpled to the ground without another word. "The next man who touches the lady dies where he stands." The voice came from the ridge above the trail, calm and commanding. Beatrice's gaze shot upward to see a lone figure on horseback, rifle aimed steadily at the remaining outlaws. The sun glinted off his wide-brimmed hat, casting his face in shadow, but there was no mistaking the deadly precision of his aim. "Damnation, it's Osborne," one of the bandits hissed, already backing away. "Drop your weapons," the stranger ordered, guiding his horse down the slope with the practiced ease of someone who'd spent his life in the saddle. "Or join your friend in hell." The three remaining outlaws exchanged nervous glances, weighing their odds. One made a fatal miscalculation, reaching for his holstered pistol. Another shot rang out and he fell backward into the dirt, eyes staring sightlessly at the cloudless sky. The remaining two bandits threw their weapons to the ground, hands shooting upward in surrender. "Tie them up," the horseman instructed the stagecoach guard as he dismounted, keeping his rifle trained on the outlaws. "The sheriff in Eureka will be mighty interested in these two." It was only when he turned to help Beatrice to her feet that she saw his face clearly for the first time. Striking blue eyes met hers from beneath the shadow of his hat. His features were weathered by sun and wind, but handsome in a rugged way that made her breath catch despite the dire circumstances. "Are you hurt, madam?" he asked, his voice gentler now as he extended a gloved hand to help her up. "And no," Beatrice managed, her knees still weak from fear. "Thank you, Mr. Xavier Osborne," he replied with a slight nod. "Most folks just call me Zav." Beatrice accepted his hand, feeling the strength in his grip as he helped her to her feet. "Beatrice Fairchild." "I owe you my life, Mr. Osborne. You're heading to Eureka?" he asked, releasing her hand once she was steady. "Yes. My uncle owns a mercantile there. I'm to help him with the bookkeeping." She smoothed her rumpled skirts, trying to regain her composure. Xavier nodded. "I'll escort the coach the rest of the way. These hills have gotten dangerous lately." As the driver and guard secured the outlaws to the back of the coach, Beatrice couldn't help but steal glances at her rescuer. There was something compelling about Xavier Osborne, a quiet confidence, a sense of justice that seemed as much a part of him as the gun at his hip or the dust on his boots. What she didn't know then, as the journey resumed with Xavier riding alongside, was that the bullet that had saved her from the outlaw's grasp had also set her on a path that would transform her ordered, predictable existence into something far more extraordinary than she could have imagined. The stagecoach rolled into Irica just before dusk, the town's buildings casting long shadows across the main street. A crowd gathered quickly as word spread of the attempted robbery and the captive outlaws. Sheriff Mills, a broad-shouldered man with a silver-streaked beard, met them at the station, whistling low when he recognized the captured men. "The Harper brothers," he said, examining the sullen faces of the bound outlaws. "Been looking for these two and their gang for months. Where's Jed Harper?" "Dead," Xavier stated flatly, dismounting. His partner, too, the sheriff, nodded grimly. "Can't say I'm sorry to hear it. They've robbed 3 coaches this month alone." He turned to Beatrice and the other passengers. "You folks are lucky Mr. Osborne was passing through." Beatrice's uncle, Harold Fairchild, pushed his way through the crowd, his face pale with concern. "Beatrice, my God, when I heard," he enveloped her in a tight embrace. "Are you harmed?" "I'm fine, Uncle Harold," she assured him, though her voice still trembled slightly. "Thanks to Mr. Osborne." Harold extended his hand to Xavier. "Sir, I cannot thank you enough. My niece is all the family I have left." Xavier shook the offered hand. "Just happened to be in the right place." "Nonsense. You must come to dinner tonight, I insist," Harold said, clapping Xavier on the shoulder. "The least I can do to thank you properly." Xavier hesitated, glancing at Beatrice. Something in her eyes must have encouraged him, for he nodded. "Much obliged, Mr. Fairchild. I accept." As they parted ways temporarily, Beatrice couldn't help but look back at the tall figure of Xavier Osborne. He stood conversing with the sheriff, his posture relaxed yet alert, a man clearly at home in this rugged frontier. She wondered what stories were written in the lines of his face, what journeys had brought him to that precise moment on the trail when her life hung in the balance. Harold's Mercantile sat on the corner of Irica's Main Street, with living quarters above the shop. After showing Beatrice to her room and giving her time to freshen up, her uncle explained more about the town as they prepared for their guest. "Irica's growing fast since the gold strike," Harold said, straightening the tablecloth. "Rough elements come with that, I'm afraid, men like those Harpers." "And men like Mr. Osborne?" Beatrice asked, arranging wildflowers in a simple vase. Harold's expression grew thoughtful. "Xavier Osborne has quite a reputation in these parts. Former Army scout during the Mexican War, then a lawman down in Arizona Territory for a spell. Now he tracks outlaws for bounties occasionally, but mostly keeps to himself at a small ranch outside town. He seems different from other men I've met," Beatrice observed, trying to sound casual. Her uncle gave her a knowing look. "He lost his wife and child to fever about 5 years back. Some say that's what drove him west." Harold paused. "He's a good man, though, honest, just carries his ghosts with him." Beatrice absorbed this information silently, her heart aching for the pain Xavier must have endured. Before she could inquire further, a knock at the door announced their guest's arrival. Xavier had exchanged his trail-worn clothes for a clean shirt and dark vest. His hair, the color of burnished copper, was still damp from washing, and he'd trimmed his beard. He removed his hat as he entered, revealing a small scar that traced his left temple. "Mr. Osborne, welcome," Harold greeted him warmly. "Please come in." Dinner was a simple but hearty affair of roast beef, potatoes, and fresh bread. As they ate, Harold regaled them with stories of Irica's early days following the gold discovery of 51. Gradually, Xavier's reserved demeanor softened, and he shared tales of his scouting days, careful to keep the more brutal aspects of frontier life from the conversation. "What brings you to California, Miss Fairchild?" Xavier asked during a lull in the conversation. "Forgive me for saying so, but you seem more suited to Boston drawing rooms than mining towns." Beatrice smiled, pleasantly surprised by his perception. "I was raised in Boston, yes. After my parents passed last winter, Uncle Harold was kind enough to offer me a home and purpose here." She smoothed her napkin. "I've had enough of drawing rooms, Mr. Osborne. They're filled with empty conversations and emptier people." Beatrice was always different from her cousins. Harold chimed in with affection. Head for numbers and a spirit that couldn't be contained by corsets and calling cards. Xavier studied her with newfound interest. It takes courage to leave everything familiar behind, or perhaps just nothing left to lose, she replied quietly. A moment of understanding passed between them, a recognition of shared loss despite their vastly different backgrounds. After dinner, Harold excused himself to finish the shop's ledger, leaving Beatrice and Xavier on the small balcony overlooking the now quiet Main Street. Stars blanketed the night sky, more brilliant than Beatrice had ever seen in Boston's smoky atmosphere. I never properly thanked you, she said, breaking the comfortable silence between them. Those men would have. She couldn't finish the sentence. But they didn't, Xavier said firmly. No need to dwell on what might have happened. Beatrice nodded, grateful for his practicality. Have you lived in Eureka long? 3 years. Got tired of drifting after. He trailed off, then simply said after, My uncle mentioned you lost your family, she said gently. I'm sorry. Xavier's hands tightened on the balcony railing. Cholera took them both in a week. My wife, Sarah, and our son, Thomas. He was just 4. His voice remained steady, but the pain in it was unmistakable. I lost my parents to influenza this past December, Beatrice offered. Different, I know, but I understand something of grief's company. Xavier turned to look at her, really look at her, as if seeing beyond the refined manners and Eastern education to the resilience beneath. Yes, I believe you do. When he left an hour later, something had shifted between them, the beginnings of a connection neither had expected to form. Over the next several weeks, Beatrice settled into life in Eureka. She brought order to her uncle's chaotic bookkeeping system and quickly became a favorite with customers, who appreciated her efficiency and lack of pretension. Though several of the town's eligible men made their interest known, Beatrice remained politely distant. Xavier appeared at the mercantile every few days, sometimes to purchase supplies, other times with no particular reason at all. He began escorting Beatrice on Sunday walks after church, their conversations ranging from literature to politics to the changing landscape of the West. Boston must seem very far away now, Xavier remarked one afternoon as they strolled along Eureka Creek, the autumn leaves beginning to turn golden above them. It does, but not in the way you might think, Beatrice replied. I miss certain comforts, I suppose, and some dear friends. But I don't miss who I was there. And who was that? Xavier asked. Beatrice considered the question. A shadow of myself, I think. My parents were loving but traditional. They saw my future as a suitable marriage, a comfortable home, children, and I wanted those things too, but I also wanted more, to be useful, to see more of the world than just one small corner of it. She glanced at him. I imagine that sounds foolish to someone who's seen as much as you have. Not foolish, Xavier said. Brave. Their walks became a town fixture, the subject of good-natured gossip and speculation. Harold watched the developing relationship with quiet approval, seeing how his niece blossomed in Xavier's company, and how the taciturn rancher seemed to shed some of his solitude when around her. On a crisp October evening, Xavier invited Beatrice to dinner at his ranch, properly chaperoned by her uncle. The small homestead sat nestled against a rise of hills, with a sturdy cabin, barn, and corral housing several fine horses. Inside, the cabin was simple but comfortable, with bookshelves that surprised Beatrice with their varied contents from military treatises to Shakespeare. You've created a real home here, Beatrice observed, running her fingers along the spines of his books. Trying to, Xavier admitted. For a long time after I lost Sarah and Thomas, I didn't see the point, just existed day to day. And now, she asked, turning to face him, his blue eyes held her steadily. Now I'm starting to remember what it's like to look forward to tomorrow. The dinner was interrupted by the arrival of Sheriff Mills, his expression grave as he dismounted outside. Xavier met him at the door. Sorry to disturb you, Xav, but we've got trouble. Jed Harper's older brother, Frank, just rode into town with 5 men. They're asking about the men who killed Jed. Xavier's posture stiffened. Frank Harper's a killer with a reputation worse than Jed's. That's why I'm here, the sheriff said. Thought you should know they're looking for you specifically." Beatrice felt cold fear creep up her spine, remembering the hatred in the outlaw's eyes as Xavier's bullet had found him. "I'll escort Miss Fairchild and her uncle back to town," Xavier said, already reaching for his gun belt. "No," the sheriff countered. "Better they stay here tonight. Harper and his men are watching the roads. I don't want them catching you all in the open." Harold nodded in agreement. "The sheriff's right, Xavier. We'll be safer here until this is resolved." Xavier reluctantly conceded. "There's a spare bedroom for you, Mr. Fairchild." "Miss Beatrice can take my room. I'll keep watch." As Harold retired and Xavier checked his weapons, Beatrice approached him by the fireplace. "This is because of me," she said quietly. "If you hadn't saved me that day, then I wouldn't have met you," Xavier interrupted, his voice gentle but firm. And that would have been the greater tragedy. The simple honesty of his words stole her breath. "Xavier, get some rest," he said, guiding her toward his room. "I promise you'll be safe." Despite her worries, exhaustion eventually claimed Beatrice, and she drifted to sleep in Xavier's bed, surrounded by the faint scent of leather and pine that she'd come to associate with him. She woke to gray dawn light and the sound of horses approaching. Xavier was already alert, rifle in hand as he peered through the window. "It's Harper and his men," he said grimly. "6 of them." Harold joined them, his face tense. "What do they want? Revenge," Xavier stated flatly. "And they'll burn this place down with us inside if that's what it takes." Outside, a voice called out, "Osborne, we know you're in there. Send out the woman who was with my brother's stage and maybe we'll let you live." Xavier's jaw tightened. "Stay inside, both of you." He moved toward the door. "Xavier, no," Beatrice caught his arm. "They'll kill you." He turned to her, cupping her face with one hand. "I've been in worse spots. Trust me." Before she could protest further, he was out the door, standing on the porch with his rifle held loosely but ready. "Frank Harper," he called. "Your quarrel's with me, not the lady." A burly man with a scar bisecting his left eye spat tobacco juice into the dirt. "My brother's dead because of her." "Your brother's dead because he was a murderer and a thief," Xavier corrected. "Miss Fairchild was an innocent passenger. You want blood for blood, take it up with me." Harper surveyed the cabin and the surrounding property. 6 against 1, Osborne. Bad odds. "Wouldn't be too sure about that count," came a new voice. Sheriff Mills emerged from behind the barn, shotgun aimed at Harper's back. With him were 3 deputies, all armed and ready. "We've been tracking you since you left town, Harper," the sheriff said. "Drop your weapons, all of you." A tense silence followed, broken when one of Harper's men made a sudden move for his pistol. Gunfire erupted, shattering the morning quiet. Xavier dove for cover behind a water trough as bullets splintered wood around him. Inside the cabin, Beatrice watched in horror as the peaceful homestead transformed into a battlefield. One of Harper's men fell from his saddle, then another. Xavier's precise shooting accounted for at least 2 of them. Frank Harper, seeing his advantage evaporating, wheeled his horse around and spurred it toward the cabin, firing wildly. A bullet shattered the window near Beatrice, showering her with glass. "He's coming for you." Harold shouted, pushing her toward the back room. "Run!" But Beatrice had endured enough running, enough fear. Her gaze fell on Xavier's spare revolver, loaded and lying on the table. Without hesitation, she grabbed it. Harper burst through the door, blood streaming from a wound on his shoulder. His wild eyes found Beatrice, hatred contorting his features. "You'll pay for my brother," he snarled, raising his gun. Beatrice fired first, her hands surprisingly steady. The bullet struck Harper in the chest, the impact throwing him backward against the wall. His own shot went wild, embedding in the ceiling as he slumped to the floor. Xavier rushed in seconds later, taking in the scene with a single glance. He moved to Harper, checking for signs of life, then looked up at Beatrice with a mixture of awe and concern. "He's dead," Xavier said simply. "Are you hurt?" Beatrice shook her head, still holding the revolver. "I couldn't let him. I couldn't bear it if he killed you because of me." Xavier gently took the gun from her trembling hands and set it aside. Then, unexpected to both of them, he pulled her into his arms, holding her tight against the solid warmth of his chest. "Brave girl," he murmured into her hair. "Brave, foolish, wonderful girl." The aftermath was a blur of activity, the sheriff documenting the shootout, bodies being removed, statements taken. When it was finally over, and they were alone again, Xavier built a fire and wrapped Beatrice in a blanket, though the shock had long since worn off. "I've never taken a life before," she said quietly, watching the flames. Xavier sat beside her. "It changes you, but you did what you had to do." "Is that how you feel about the men you've killed?" His expression grew distant. "Sometimes. Other times I wonder if there could have been another way." He looked at her. "But today there wasn't. Harper came to kill us all." "What happens now?" Beatrice asked. "Now," Xavier considered. "Now we go on living. It's all any of us can do." In the weeks that followed, Erica buzzed with talk of the Harper gang's demise. Beatrice found herself the subject of both admiration and speculation, particularly among the town's women, who viewed her with a new respect. She had faced violence and survived, had defended not only herself, but those she cared for. Xavier became a more frequent visitor to the mercantile, often staying to help with inventory or repairs. Harold, observing their growing closeness, began finding reasons to leave them alone together, though always within the bounds of propriety. As winter settled over Northern California, bringing cold rains instead of the snow Beatrice was accustomed to in Boston, Xavier arrived one evening with an unusual request. "I'd like to take you to dinner at the Erica Hotel," he said, standing somewhat stiffly in the mercantile doorway. "They've hired a new cook from San Francisco who's supposed to be quite good." Beatrice smiled at his formal manner. "I'd like that very much." The Erica Hotel dining room represented the height of the frontier town's attempt at sophistication, with white tablecloths and actual wine glasses. Xavier had dressed for the occasion in a new shirt and string tie, his copper hair neatly combed. "You look beautiful," he said as he held her chair, his eyes appreciating the simple blue dress she'd chosen. "Thank you." "I'm afraid my Boston wardrobe isn't quite suited to Erica's social events," she replied with a soft laugh. "I wouldn't know the difference," he admitted, "but I know what pleases my eye." The dinner was the finest either had enjoyed in months, but Beatrice sensed that Xavier had something particular on his mind. He seemed almost nervous, unusual for a man normally so self-contained. "Is everything all right?" she finally asked as they finished their dessert. "You seem preoccupied." Xavier set down his fork and met her gaze directly. "I've been thinking about the future, Beatrice, something I hadn't done for a long time before meeting you." Her heart quickened. "Oh, I'm not a wealthy man," he continued. "My ranch turns a modest profit, and I've saved most of the bounty money over the years. It's enough for a comfortable life, but not luxury." "Xavier," Beatrice said gently, "I grew up with luxury. It doesn't guarantee happiness." He nodded, seeming to gather his courage. "What I'm trying to say, poorly, is that I've come to care for you deeply. More than I thought possible after losing Sarah. Different, but no less real." Beatrice reached across the table to touch his hand. "I feel the same. Do you?" His blue eyes searched hers. "Because I need to be certain before I ask what I brought you here to ask." "Yes," she said simply. "I do." Xavier took a small velvet pouch from his pocket and placed it on the table between them. "I had this made in San Francisco, rode down there myself last month." With trembling fingers, Beatrice opened the pouch. Inside was a ring, a simple gold band set with a small but perfect diamond, flanked by two tiny sapphires. "Beatrice Fairchild," Xavier said, his voice low and earnest, "would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Tears welled in Beatrice's eyes as she slipped the ring onto her finger. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Xavier." Their wedding took place on Christmas Eve of 1858 in Erica's small white church. The town turned out in force, partly from genuine affection for the couple, and partly from curiosity about the Eastern lady who had shot Frank Harper and won Xavier Osborne's heart. Beatrice wore a cream-colored gown that Harold had secretly ordered from San Francisco, with a wreath of winter berries in her hair instead of a veil. Xavier, standing tall and proud at the altar in a new black suit, watched her approach with such naked love in his eyes that several of the town's matrons dabbed at tears. "I never thought to be standing here again," he said quietly as she reached his side. "Nor I to have found such happiness so far from home," she replied. Their vows were simple and heartfelt, promising faithfulness, respect, and companionship through whatever joys and sorrows life might bring. When the pastor pronounced them husband and wife, Xavier's kiss was gentle but held a promise that brought a blush to Beatrice's cheeks. The celebration afterward at the hotel was the social event of the year in Irica, with music, dancing, and enough food to feed half the county. Even Sheriff Mills unbent enough to attempt a waltz with the schoolteacher. Later that night, as Xavier carried her over the threshold of his now their ranch house, Beatrice felt a sense of rightness that transcended the anxiety a new bride might normally feel. "Welcome home, Mrs. Osborne," he said, setting her gently on her feet in the main room, which had been transformed with fresh pine boughs and candles. "It already feels like home," she said, removing her bonnet and gloves, "because you're here." Their first night as husband and wife was a revelation for both tender moments of discovery, mixed with passionate abandon that left them breathless and clinging to each other in the darkness. "I didn't know it could be like this," Beatrice confessed, her head resting on his chest as dawn approached. Xavier's fingers traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. "Nor did I, not quite like this." Spring came early to Northern California in 1859, bringing wildflowers and new beginnings. Beatrice took to ranch life with surprising aptitude, learning to ride properly, side saddle abandoned after the first month, helping with the horses Xavier bred, and transforming the cabin into a true home with her touches. She continued working part-time at her uncle's mercantile, using her bookkeeping skills to expand the business. Harold, delighted with his niece's happiness, began courting the widow who ran the town's small library, much to Beatrice's delight. One warm May evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the hills gold and crimson, Beatrice turned to her husband with an expression that mingled nervousness and joy. "Xavier, I have something to tell you." He set aside the bridle he'd been repairing. "What is it, love?" She took his hand and placed it gently on her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a baby." Xavier went utterly still, his expression unreadable for a long moment. Then, to Beatrice's surprise, tears filled his blue eyes. "A baby," he repeated, his voice thick with emotion. "Are you happy?" She asked, suddenly uncertain. His answer was to pull her into his arms, cradling her against him as if she were made of precious glass. "Happy doesn't begin to describe it," he whispered against her hair. "Terrified, yes, but so very, very happy." The months that followed were filled with preparations. Xavier added a nursery to the cabin, working tirelessly to create a perfect space for their child. Beatrice sewed tiny garments and read medical texts, determined to be prepared for every aspect of motherhood. The baby arrived in early December, during a rare snowfall that blanketed Irica in white. After a difficult but ultimately uncomplicated labor attended by the town's doctor and the experienced midwife, Beatrice gave birth to a healthy son with a shock of his father's copper hair and his mother's determined chin. "What shall we call him?" Xavier asked, holding his son with a tenderness that made Beatrice's heart overflow with love. "I thought perhaps William after my father," she suggested. "William Harold Osborne. Perfect," Xavier agreed, kissing her damp forehead. "He's perfect." Life settled into a new rhythm with little William at its center. The boy grew strong and curious, showing early signs of his father's quiet determination and his mother's quick intelligence. Xavier proved to be a devoted father, never too busy or tired to spend time with his son. In the summer of 1860, news reached Irica of increasing tensions between North and South. Xavier, reading the newspaper reports with concern, shared his fears with Beatrice late one night. "There will be war," he predicted grimly, "and it will be worse than anything this country has seen." "Surely they'll find a compromise," Beatrice said, though she knew the divisions ran deep. Xavier shook his head. "Some differences can't be bridged with words alone. Blood will be spilled before this is settled." "Would you go?" she asked, the question that had been haunting her. "If there's a call for men." He set aside the paper and took her hands in his. "My war-fighting days are behind me, Beatrice. My place is here with you and William. California is far from those battlefields, thank God. True to Xavier's prediction, the Civil War erupted in April 1861. Even from their remote corner of California, they felt its effects as prices rose. Supplies became scarce, and young men from the town headed east to fight for Union or Confederacy according to their convictions. The war years brought changes to Yreka as well. Gold production declined, but agriculture expanded. Harold Fairchild married his librarian and expanded the mercantile to include farming equipment. Xavier's horse breeding business flourished as the army sought mounts, providing the family with unexpected prosperity. In the spring of 1863, Beatrice gave birth to a daughter they named Eleanor Sarah, after both their mothers. Little Ellie, as she was soon called, had Beatrice's blonde hair and Xavier's blue eyes, a perfect blend of them both. "I never thought I could be this fortunate twice in one lifetime," Xavier confessed as they watched their children play in the yard on Ellie's first birthday. William, now 4, was showing his sister how to pet a new foal with gentle hands. "Nor I," Beatrice agreed. "When those outlaws pulled me from that stagecoach, I thought my life might end that day. Instead, it truly began." Xavier pulled her close, kissing her temple. "A single bullet changed everything." "Not the bullet," she corrected, looking up at him with love. "The man behind it." The end of the Civil War in 1865 brought a new wave of settlers to California, many seeking fresh starts after the devastation of the East. Xavier and Beatrice expanded their ranch, building a larger house to accommodate their growing family and his successful horse business. By 1870, they had added another son, James Xavier, to their family. Yreka had grown into a proper town with a school where William excelled in mathematics and science, while showing his father's affinity for horses and the outdoors. On the 10th anniversary of the day, Xavier had saved Beatrice from the Harper gang. They hosted a celebration at their ranch for friends and family. As twilight fell and lanterns were lit around the yard, Xavier took Beatrice's hand and led her away from the gathering to the quiet shade of an oak tree they'd planted when William was born. 10 years, he said, brushing a strand of honey blonde hair, now streaked with a few strands of silver, from her face. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday that I saw you for the first time, standing so brave despite your fear. And sometimes it feels like we've always been together," Beatrice replied, leaning into his touch. At 34, she had lost the last vestiges of the proper Boston girl, replaced by a confident woman comfortable in the life she'd built. "I have something for you," Xavier said, reaching into his pocket. He withdrew a small box and opened it to reveal a gold locket, intricately engraved. "Open it." Inside was a tiny daguerreotype of their family, all 5 of them, taken in Yreka the previous month. On the opposite side was engraved, "A single moment changed everything." Tears welled in Beatrice's eyes as Xavier fastened the locket around her neck. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "Not half as beautiful as the life we've made," he replied, drawing her into his arms. As they stood together under the oak tree, the sounds of their children's laughter mingling with music and conversation from the party, Beatrice reflected on the extraordinary journey that had led her here. From the terror of that day on the stagecoach to the profound joy of the family, they'd created all because a cowboy's bullet had changed her fate. And as Xavier's lips found hers in a kiss that still held the same passion as their first, she knew with absolute certainty that some destinies, no matter how unexpected, were written in the stars long before we understood them. In the years that followed, the Osborne family continued to thrive. William followed in his father's footsteps, becoming an expert horse trainer whose reputation spread throughout California and beyond. Eleanor developed her mother's head for business, eventually taking over her great-uncle Harold's mercantile when he retired. Young James, combining his father's frontier skills with his mother's love of learning, became a surveyor for the expanding railroad. Xavier and Beatrice weathered the changes together: the coming of the railroad to Yreka, the gradual taming of the frontier, the passage of California into a new era of growth and development. Through it all, their bond remained unshakable, forged in that moment of danger and courage on a dusty trail and strengthened through decades of shared joys and sorrows. In 1893, on their 35th wedding anniversary, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and friends both old and new, Xavier raised a glass in toast to his still beautiful wife. "To Beatrice," he said, his voice carrying the same warmth that had first captured her heart, though now touched with the rasp of age. "Who taught me that second chances are possible and that love is worth risking everything for?" Beatrice smiled at him across the table, the gold locket still hanging around her neck, a tangible reminder of how a single moment, a single bullet had changed not just her fate, but the course of generations to come. "And to Xavier," she responded, raising her own glass. "The cowboy who saved not only my life, but my heart." As the California sun set on their celebration, casting long golden rays across the land they'd nurtured together, Beatrice and Xavier exchanged a look that spoke volumes without words, a look that said some love stories, especially those born in the most unexpected circumstances, were destined to become legends that would be told long after they were gone. And indeed, for generations to come, the Osborne family would recount the tale of their beginning of a stagecoach, desperate outlaws, a cowboy's precise aim, and the extraordinary love story that blossomed from that moment of danger and courage in the wild California frontier of 1858.